In recent days, the United States has dramatically increased its pressure on Ukraine. Washington is openly threatening to cut all military support if Kyiv refuses to accept a proposed peace plan, a plan that Ukraine and nearly all European governments consider completely unacceptable. This threat raises a crucial question. What would actually happen if the United States stopped sending weapons? Would Ukraine's defenses collapse? Would Russia suddenly gain the upper hand? Or could Europe and Ukraine's own defense industry compensate for the loss? These are huge questions, and today we're going to take a very close look at them. What parts of US support are truly essential? Where can Europe step in? And where is Ukraine already becoming independent of American weapons? Let's break it all down. If we want to seriously evaluate how much pressure Washington can put on Kyiv, we first have to understand what leverage the United States actually has left. And at least on the tactical level, that leverage is far smaller than many people assume. Yes, American support played a crucial role during the early phases of the Russian full-scale invasion. But the actual importance of US weapons has steadily decreased over the past months. In fact, even earlier in the war, US deliveries were much more limited than most people realize. Take heavy armor, for example. Since the beginning of the war, the US has delivered just 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. 31. That's a laughably small number when compared to Europe's contributions. European countries together have sent somewhere between 600 and 800 main battle tanks to Ukraine in the same period. In that context, those 31 Abrams barely register. And the same pattern appears with infantry fighting vehicles. The Bradley has performed extremely well in Ukraine, no question. But it's not irreplaceable. It's a product of the late 70s and 80s, and Europe today has far more modern systems that can fill the same role. One of the most promising alternatives is already on track to be built directly inside Ukraine, the German-designed Lynx infantry fighting vehicle. The first units, manufactured in Hungary, arrived in late 2024 for testing. And while things were quiet for a while, that changed recently. At a Ramstein meeting, the German and Ukrainian defense ministers signed an agreement for a joint production project. Rheinmetall plans to open a factory in Ukraine this year with the potential to produce hundreds of Lynx vehicles. And the Lynx isn't just a replacement, it's one of the most modern and modular infantry fighting vehicles in the world. The US Army itself has considered adopting it. So even in this area, Europe and Ukraine together can cover the gap left by Washington. Artillery tells the same story. Ukraine now produces most of its own artillery barrels and has massively expanded production of the Bodana self-propelled howitzer. By autumn 2025, Ukrainian factories are expected to turn out around 40 systems per month, enough not only to meet frontline demand, but even to create a surplus. Ammunition production is rising too. Europe and Ukraine together are on track to produce roughly 3 million artillery shells per year by 2026, matching Russia's output. Here again, US supplies are no longer the decisive factor. Ukraine's air capabilities are also shifting toward European support. Kyiv manufactures the vast majority of its drones and long-range strike systems domestically. Meanwhile, the future of Ukraine's manned air force is expected to rely heavily on European jets. Kyiv recently announced plans to acquire up to 150 Gripen E fighters, along with around 100 Rafale jets from France. And remember, the United States has not donated a single fighter aircraft from its own stocks. Even in long-range strike capabilities, Ukraine is rapidly adapting. HIMARS and ATACMS were game changers in the first years of the war, but Russia has learned to jam and avoid them, and the US controls the supply of their ammunition. Ukraine's response has been to accelerate the development of domestically produced medium-range strike drones. These systems, capable of flying tens or even hundreds of kilometers with payloads up to 100 kilograms, can replicate part of the HIMARS effect. Deep strikes on command posts, logistics hubs, and air defense positions. They are not a full replacement, but they significantly reduce Ukraine's dependence on US-made rockets. All this shows that, on the tactical and operational levels, Ukraine can survive a cut in US weapons deliveries. It would be painful, yes, but nowhere near enough to collapse the front line. European deliveries combined with Ukraine's rapidly expanding defense industry are simply too strong for that. But when we move from the tactical level to the strategic level, things become more complicated. Because there are two areas where the United States remains absolutely critical: air defense and intelligence. The Patriot air defense system is irreplaceable when it comes to intercepting Russian ballistic and hypersonic missiles. If Patriot batteries were withdrawn, the impact would not be felt primarily on the front line. It would be felt in Ukraine's cities. Russia uses its ballistic missiles mainly to target critical energy infrastructure and residential buildings. Without Patriot, many of those missiles would get through. Europe does have one comparable system, France's SAMP-T. The newest variant is reportedly excellent, in some ways even superior to Patriot. But the problem is simple: there aren't enough of them. Ukraine has ordered 8 new SAMP-T systems from France, but the first deliveries are expected only in about 2 years. Maybe that timeline could be accelerated in an emergency, but nobody knows by how much. And then there is intelligence. This is perhaps the hardest thing to replace. No European country has capabilities even close to the United States. Without US intelligence, Ukraine would lose early warning for Russian bomber launches and would receive far fewer precise targeting coordinates for deep strike operations. The front wouldn't collapse, but civilian casualties would rise, and Ukraine's long-range strike campaign would become significantly less effective. So what does all of this mean? It means the United States does not hold a magic card that can force Ukraine into capitulation. Ukraine can continue fighting without American tanks, without American artillery, and even without American aircraft. What the US can affect, tragically, is the number of civilians killed by Russian missile attacks. That is where the absence of Patriot and US intelligence would be felt the most. And that, in turn, makes the current American pressure on Kyiv all the more troubling. But now, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think the US will actually follow through on its threats in the coming days? And what should Europe do if Washington really steps back? Let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks for watching, take care, and until next time.